I'm Matt Reynolds, and this is my podcast.
I can do the job, but running the business is quite difficult. What a lot of tradesmen lack, and I was probably one of them, is business skills.
I don't mind making mistakes. You learn from your mistakes.
Information is all around you in the minds of people that work beside you.
Welcome back to the Trench Talk podcast. I'm your host, Matt Reynolds, and I travelled to the Kay Burton head office for this episode to talk property with Michael Armstrong, a partner at Kay Burton, and their General Manager of Marketing, Justin Hodgson. The idea of these discussions, for those of you joining us for the first time, is to go into the trenches of achievement and talk, not with people who are orchestrating from some lofty perspective, but to those high performers who are actually in the trenches, honing their craft. That has included guests from the worlds of business, sport and entertainment, all of whom are on the front lines doing amazing things. The Kay Burton name has been synonymous with luxury property in the Melbourne market, connecting buyers from around the globe with premium Melbourne and Mornington Peninsula real estate for more than 80 years. This is a conversation about the changes within the property sector, and in the next hour or so, you'll get an insight into the future of property as the first mainstream signs of the industry adopting technology and embracing digital solutions emerge. There's no doubt many efficiencies can be harnessed in the property sector using technology, but how to think about and when to move on different options has become very important. As we have seen, being too slow or too fast can be disastrous. We also covered a lot more, including both the good and bad of real estate disruption, technology strategies, offline versus online marketing, including social media, customer experience, opening new offices, using WeChat to sell property, analysing data to track property maintenance, and artificial intelligence to drive decisions like buying, selling and renovating, the Kay Burton brand, and as always, much more. To learn more about Kay Burton and to find both Michael and Justin, head to kayburton.com.au. If you enjoyed Trench Talk, head to xrm.com.au/podcast and opt in for the newsletter. We'll make sure you're notified when every new episode of the show is released. Trench Talk is available everywhere good podcasts are served. So if you're feeling super nice, please leave a review, comment, rating, or whatever your chosen podcast platform allows. If you do enjoy this episode, you may also like to go back to episode 4 of Trench Talk, which features Kay Burton Managing Director Ross Savis and his own journey building a career in the real estate industry. Please enjoy this chat with Michael Armstrong and Justin Hodgson. Justin and Michael, thanks for doing this.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Matt.
We are in the Kay Burton boardroom today in South Yarra. I thought we might start with each of you, maybe Justin first, what your role is here at Kay Burton and what that involves on a day-to-day basis.
I joined Kay Burton in February last year, so I'm relatively new in terms of Kay Burton years. My primary role is I'm General Manager of Marketing. I look after all the marketing team. I manage the marketing from a corporate perspective for all of our offices, and I'm primarily responsible for the marketing of all of our vendor campaigns, so the advertising campaigns for our vendors' properties across all of the year. And so there's a lot of responsibility that goes with that. We're dealing with people's most prized possessions and making sure we get a good result for them. And probably one of the other big things is I feel a real responsibility to the brand. The Kay Burton brand is hugely renowned, well regarded in the marketplace, and looking after that is a key part of my role.
And Michael?
I've been here at Kay Burton about 15 years, Matt, and I guess a lot has changed in my time, not only within the business but within the industry. So it's been an interesting career so far. I'm in my late 30s, so hopefully I'm still got a lot of track to run in this business. So my role in the business, I started in sales, and that's still my primary role, is to be a real estate salesperson. However, there's other layers that go with that, and that includes I'm a partner of the business now, so I'm an equity participant in the business. So with that comes more responsibility, and I think the company is going through, and Justin will obviously touch on this as we progress, but it's going through a lot of change at the moment. There's been a very traditional way of doing business in the industry and at this company for a long time, and not that our core fundamentals will change, but obviously technology's speeding up, things like that. So I bring a younger, fresher perspective to a very established business.
And you recently opened your Armidale office,
Correct.
which is kind of a little bit anti-technology, would you say that? Sort of going down that bricks and mortar route. So what's the philosophy, the reason that sits behind that? Because, I mean, Armidale's only, for anyone who doesn't know, only the next suburb over or 2 suburbs over. So why do you do that, and what does that mean for selling real estate?
Yeah, well, we had presence in the Armidale market for decades now, and we were servicing that from an office in South Yarra, which, as you say, is geographically not far from where that is. But we wanted to do that initially as to have a shop front to High Street in Armidale, which is a pretty renowned retail strip in Melbourne, of course. And we were going to partner with an art gallery to do an experience style offering to the market. So it was changing that very staid way of what the traditional real estate office was, which is usually, quite an intimidating place for a lot of people to go, and it's very corporate, and it's boardrooms and it's meeting rooms and it's a big reception desk, and that's always been that traditional look of a real estate office. But we were wanting to shift that a bit and create a more experienced space. The business that we were going to partner with in that, unfortunately, wasn't able to participate, but we opened up regardless, and we're about a year into that office now. It was also to kind of put a peg in the ground as well in that marketplace, because we do have people who just have a natural connection to that market, be it whether they live in the area or they've got longevity. I'm talking about our sales agents and our property management people, whether they've got kids at school in the area. It's those natural connections that you have to that marketplace. So it was just making a greater commitment to that area, and we've seen that in the last 12 months. People have, perhaps who were a bit iffy about using us, are now, there's no doubt, sort of thing. It's showing commitment to that marketplace.
And that comes from just plain being there on the ground.
That's it. It's a pretty community-driven market, so you've got to be in the community. And I think that goes for a lot of real estate businesses these days. I mean, we talk about tech and we talk about brands and things like that. At the end of the day, it's a people business, and you've got to be ingrained in that community.
And we've seen what happens recently, right, Justin, when people come in and try is wrong. Well, they did try purple bricks to kind of get rid of that model. Were they too early? Why didn't it work? Because they're now pulled out, obviously, now. So did they miss that on the ground in the trenches part of it? Why didn't it work?
Yeah, look, community is a great word, I think, for real estate. If you don't understand the market that you operate in and you're not perceived to be part of that environment and that market, you're not one of them, then it's difficult to get cut through. The most successful agents that we have are almost pillars of their community and renowned within that area. So that's the first part. I think the Purple Bricks model has some flaws to it, and for me the biggest flaw with that model is I'm not sure that the real estate agent works in the best interests of the vendor in a model where they get paid regardless of the outcome of the property. And so I think that's the biggest challenge for them. Why that worked in the UK market and didn't work here is probably the question that nobody's really got an answer for, even the Purple Bricks guys, because it does work there, but it clearly didn't work here. And, there was lots of stories around that if you didn't move your properties on, you didn't get any more listings as an agent, and you weren't in control of that funnel. And as a result, they were just trying to move those properties through, and that left a bad taste in a lot of people's mouths. And it doesn't take long in the Australian marketplace for your reputation to be built and for people to understand what the benefits and disadvantages are of your model. And I think that that's probably the biggest challenge that they had. But Mike's more on the ground. I'd love his thoughts on the experience there.
I don't know. I think there were a lot of people who targeted real estate in Australia. They wanted to disrupt. It was the buzzword for so long, and people are still, we still hear the comments from a lot of investment bankers and things like that. Oh, real estate's a very disruptable business. I went over we as a business go over to a conference called Inman in the US, which is a tech real estate conference. It has a big focus on tech, and there was a guy that got up and he owned a business called Redfin, which is basically a US version of Purple Bricks. And he got up and talked in front of 3,000 real estate agents, or realtors as they call them over in the US. And he got up and he'd had a lot of success with this sort of virtual real estate agency. He disrupted it, and he'd done a pretty good job. And he got up and he said in front of all these people, he said, I've been trying to take your jobs, but I'm going to stop trying now, because he said, I can't crack the actual emotive element of residential real estate. He said, you can't write an algorithm for motivation. He said, I'm sorry, because every single human being has a different motivation behind their transaction. And this is where I think moving forward, it's this whole emotional intelligence in real estate is like the greatest weapon you can have as a salesperson, to understand the perspective of your client and what they want to get out of it. I think Purple Bricks was just trying to remove every element of emotion and motivation out of it and make it just a very transactional sort of business. And it's fine if you're selling a very generic product, but there's too much emotion wrapped up in real estate to remove. You can't remove it altogether. So that's probably why I reckon people didn't, it just didn't take here.
Seems to be a bit of an evolution with technology, right? Players come in to disrupt is their goal, as you say. But what I've sort of noticed tends to happen is that the first one that comes in kind of tries to turn it all technology regardless of everything else. And in a market like Australian real estate, it doesn't work because we're dealing with, I think, as you said, Justin, people's most valuable asset, and they're emotional about it and all that sort of stuff. So the approach seems to be one that comes secondary, and the one that seems to work and then stick is this using technology in what you're already doing to make that more efficient, right? Rather than turn the whole model upside down.
Yeah.
So part of your job here, if I understand this correctly, Justin, is to do a bit of that with Kay Burton and I suppose move the business in that direction, or certainly take advantage of some of those things. So can you talk a little bit about what you've done since you've come in and what it means?
Yeah, I might just start with a bit of my background, because it gives a bit of context for why I was brought in. So my background's in digital and software development. So I was a product manager. Yep. I've been involved in the internet since 96. I backpacked around America in 96 for 12 months and came back, and AOL and GeoCities and Hotmail, and it all just landed. And it was perfect timing. And when I came back, I got involved in an internet business with Fairfax, ironically in the real estate industry, with the ad online product, which was the ability to put your own line ads in the paper through the internet rather than calling up a call centre. Was my very first job. And I've ironically gone full circle and back in real estate after spending time in cars and jobs. So my background has been largely in those classified verticals from a digital perspective. So
they were the days when, sorry to cut you off, but when you actually had to buy the Saturday, Sunday paper 100%. To work out what was being sold on the weekend, right?
It was the rivers of gold of Fairfax, right? And there was a view at that time that the internet was going to democratise businesses, that those barriers to entries would all disappear, because you didn't have to print, you didn't have to distribute, all of those elements in the classified space. All that's happened is the barriers to entry have just changed, and they're actually harder now than they ever were, which is now brand and audience, and those things are actually really difficult to come by in the online world than to print a publication and distribute it out to your audience. So ironically, some businesses have been able to start small and grow over time by just doing a printed model. Melbourne Weekly and those sorts of things have grown in the real estate space despite the fact that the internet has taken off, but you've been able to carve those out. No one really carves small digital businesses out. They've had attempts. I was in the jobs market, and lots of people would come up and say, if we get 1% of the market from Seek, we'll have a business model. It doesn't happen. Yep. Right? If we get 1% of the business model from car sales, we'll have a business model that works. It doesn't happen. You get swallowed up really quickly. So my job when I came on board was to look at technology and how it could help this established traditional real estate business to move to a more modern way of doing business. Now, the trick is to not use technology to disrupt the entire model. It's to use technology to make the agents more efficient and to make the customer experience for the vendor and the buyer as efficient as possible. So you just remove the pain points out. By making it more efficient for the agent, it gives them more time to be able to spend with their clients face-to-face. And if you remove the pain points out for the buyer or the vendor, it gives them more of a empowered position to be able to sell their house from. So if you can achieve that outcome, that's the directive. in a business like ours, it's a very boutique business at the very top end of the market. Technology will play a different role than if you're a large-scale volume seller in a different market, because technology and the efficiency requirements there are going to be different. We're not looking to sell tens of thousands of houses. We're looking to sell towards 1,000 houses or 1,000 plus. And as a result, ours is about making that customer experience for these people that have limited time, lots of money, really important people, making that experience as good as it possibly can and enabling the agents to be able to achieve that outcome for them.
And on a practical sense, like, what does that mean? Does that mean that there's certain programs that you use, that you have a different thinking on it? How does that play out on a day-to-day basis?
So look, in real terms, we've implemented a new CRM that enables us to really efficiently manage the pipeline of the agents and work that really efficiently and really seamlessly. Empowers them to be able to segment their audience and target people that are in the market for property. It's enabled us to look into digital presentation technology that enables us to do presentations digitally rather than printing out paper presentations. It enables that data to be synced throughout our system so we're not rekeying data all the way through. It enables us to build digital marketing packages to reach active and passive buyers in the market. In the past, you've had the portals, the REAs, Domain, Real Estate Views to reach the active buyers, and you've used print to reach passive buyers. So these are the people that the property would be of interest, but they're not actively looking at this particular point in time.
Yep.
And digital actually straddles both of those. So Facebook network, Google Display Network, we're able to reach people that really target into them and know that if we expose them to our properties, that if they're not in the market for them today, that they might be in the market for them at some point in the future.
Yeah, that's a good point, because I'm just thinking, like, you go through your Facebook feed, as you alluded to just then, and you see, I know you guys sell $10 million, $15 million, $20 million homes.
Absolutely.
Probably a lot more than most others.
Yeah.
Who really is scrolling through their Facebook feed and thinks, oh, that looks pretty good at $17.5 million, and I really would like a new pool, so I might just grab that this afternoon. So there's a brand element to that as well, is what you're really saying, that you've got to you're trying to be the people that we think about when we think about luxury homes. Is that right?
You know what, it's a really interesting, it sounds counterintuitive, but actually the more expensive the house, the more impulsive the purchase can become, which sounds completely weird. Yeah. And you wouldn't have thought about that at all. But Kay Burton has historically been one of the largest purchasers of print advertising to promote their properties. And that's because people will be, our clients have disposable income. They don't need to regularly go to the bank and find different ways to fund to purchase a really expensive house. Yeah. And so they can be in environments where they're casually just going about their business and being exposed to these properties. And what happens is, I've always wanted to live in that house, or I've always wanted to live in that street, or I've always wanted to live in a house like that. And exposing those people, they're not in the market, they don't have to move today, but they do get exposed to that, and they do make those decisions based on, that's the start of their journey. It's obviously they're not going to go from scrolling through Facebook or reading news online and seeing one of the display ads next to that content to purchasing the property that day. But it'll be the start of opening their eyes that maybe they could investigate this and take those steps to contacting an agent and going through that process.
Is reaching people digitally, socially, or however you go about it, does that also work for those higher end properties really well? Because, I mean, logic says that if you're spending that sort of money on a home, right, you're probably not a first home owner. You've probably, getting on a little bit in life. Like, I mean, you're not 25 or whatever in most cases. Yep. So you may be spending more time in print. Like, have you seen those properties transact digitally yet? Like, have we got to that point?
Well, the transaction digitally is probably too far, right?
Yeah,
but promoting digitally is absolutely a way to go. People think of social media as a young person's outlet, a young person's consumption of social media. The average age of Facebook users is growing all the time, and that middle-aged housewife is a huge consumer of social media. We've looked at the stats. We've actually done the stats for Facebook in the Melbourne metro market, and I think off the top of my head it was 55% of females are over the age of 35.
Yeah, wow.
And are consuming that. We'll have conversations with our vendors, and they'll go, our audience is not in that, and we'll explain to them that some of their audience will, but It's not all in social. So the display ads that will sit against the content that they're reading online actually reaches that audience that's not on social because, well, they might not be on social. They're not necessarily going out and buying a newspaper, or they're not going and buying a fishing magazine or a motorsport magazine or international travel magazine anymore. They're reading and consuming all of that content online. So you can retarget them on other channels with display ads, get them in social if they've seen it there. So it's a multi-channel approach. And as a marketer, if I'm promoting our brand, I always do a multi-channel approach, and I always encourage our vendors to do the same thing for their property.
So do you, Michael, work pretty closely with the marketing department to get that mix right? Is that one of the changes that you've seen?
Definitely.
In your time here?
Absolutely. So, like I said, I sort of started probably in real estate before the internet really took hold and people searched online. I remember when we used to put old surveys into our presentations, I remember the stats used to be that, 15% of buyers were found on the internet, and it was like that was a big stat at the time, and that will grow one day sort of thing. And now it's impossible to avoid kind of thing. So I've sort of seen it go full spectrum, but it's interesting as time goes on. I mean, you do, for some properties, you do keep a very broad-based approach, and you do have to think about who the buyer might be, and sometimes you have to just take the blinkers off, and the property that you think will be, a family buying it, all of a sudden a couple downsizing in their 70s buy it, and you don't see it coming. But you've got to be very open-minded. Now, the way that we work, I mean, it's not uncommon, in fact it's more common than not, that Justin will sit in our presentations to a lot of our clients and say, this is our digital approach to your marketing campaign, or this is our multi-channel approach to your marketing campaign, because it is such a specialised field. And what the role that we might play as agents is to say, well, we will help profile the buyer, and then Justin will set a course based on that profiling.
Okay, and then fit that in, it makes sense. Yep.
That's it. And for some properties, I mean, you look at South Yarra as a suburb or whatever, a large proportion of buyers or the audience and the clicks come from, say, Sydney CBD or something like that. And you might not have perhaps necessarily known that a decade ago, but now we have the data on that. So we can use that to our clients' advantage to say, we need to get some exposure into Sydney because people who've moved up there for work or whatever look back to South Yarra to when they move back to town. Things like that. So it plays an enormous role, and it's becoming more and more specialised.
And I would have thought it probably has gone a long way in opening up some of the more global markets, as you just alluded to. Sydney's not global, obviously, but you do sell to a lot of overseas buyers. So this internet infusion into what you're doing has to be a big part of that, right? Just from sheer ease of not having to order a newspaper from a city the other side of the world, right? That's brought a lot of people in, I would have assumed.
It does and it doesn't, because you do have a firewall in China to get past, which a lot of Australian hosted sites and things like that don't get through the firewall in China. So I'm talking about, the REAs of this world and things like that. It's not so easy to access them, or they restrict access to them or something like this. Justin, you can be more accurate about this, but there's sites like, there's a website, Juwai, that we put our properties on in China that is hosted in China, so it gets behind that firewall. So the digital world plays a part, but we find that a lot of our offshore sales are very much driven by the relationship. So we'll go and physically spend time in, major expat hubs. We've got a trip in about 3 weeks that I'll be part of, that we're going to Hong Kong and Shanghai to actually sit and build those relationships. And so there's a lot of direct marketing to those people, but yes, you can also, digitally target those people. And yes, that's where obviously Justin's influence has enabled us to probably just be more efficient with the message to those people and get to them probably more efficiently as well.
This business has spent 3 decades and millions of dollars building that database of relationships across the globe, which is incredible what they've done. Mike's right. What we're able to do now is utilise some technology to be a bit more efficient in reaching the people that we don't know. And we've built specific campaigns where we've retargeted expats in London, New York, Singapore, Hong Kong for example. It's really difficult to get in behind the firewall in China, and so we find other ways to do that, and some of the visits do that, and some of the international portals do that. Some targeting on WeChat and Weibo and those sorts of things enable that a little bit, but it's still difficult. But there's nothing like the ability to have a trusted relationship with people. And, you know, there's case studies of us selling houses through a live stream over WeChat, and people buying it based on the trust that they have in us to represent them in this country. $8 million property. It's incredible.
So those buyers were in, I think, LA at the time, but they were Chinese background, and Jamie Mee, who runs our international division, walked them through a house, you know, just on her phone sort of thing. So there's that sort of stuff that goes on, I guess, at the top end.
It seems to be a lot of trust put in WeChat. I've just come across this, you know, just recently, and I suppose and it may be just not in Australia, but sometimes we can think, you know, what goes on Facebook we don't give a lot of credit to, whereas it seems to be totally the opposite for whatever reason with WeChat. It's really interesting you should say that, because I'm pretty sure that Jamie also brings people out, shows them around the city, what it's about, the good points, the bad points, all that sort of stuff too, right? So someone's buying a house out there, it's an extremely big change in lifestyle, right, from where they might be in parts of China. So we're collecting more and more data on property. There's the advertising component, right? But are people yet interested in property data? It might be energy efficiencies, those sort of things inside the property. Are we not quite to that spot yet?
It's a big question. There's certainly, I mean, there's a huge amount of focus on this space, on building digital profiles for properties. And, you know, obviously the consumer data is huge, and that's used, you know, for marketing purposes, but also, you know, there are companies that will try and predict who the next seller in a street within a given suburb is, and they might.
There's companies that do that.
There's lead generation businesses that do this, and they'll run an algorithm over. Just say, Matt, you bought a house as a single man, you got married and had kids, and all of a sudden based on the average tenure of stay in that street or whatever, they'll predict that you need a new house soon, and therefore we should go and knock on Matt's door and he'll be selling sometime soon. Or, you know, those people have been there for 30 years, they're due for a downsize. You know, there's companies that now are going to that extent to predict what your behaviour might be as a buyer and seller of real estate. So,
does it work?
It's probably closer to the starting point than down the road. Like we look at this stuff as a business, and we, like I said earlier, we go to the US because they tend to be a year or two ahead of us on a lot of this stuff.
3 or 4.
Light years.
Sometimes.
No, they are.
And sometimes behind as well, because their data sources are not as regulated and a bit more spasmodic. And so without data, some of this stuff gets held up. So in some ways we're ahead, and in some ways we're behind.
And I remember the last conference I went over there was this guy who runs probably the biggest real estate sort of network in America, and he got up and he said exactly that. He said if you're looking at the path of going down where you're completely tech orientated, or you're completely a relationship orientated, non-tech business, or a hybrid of both, he said I think a lot of businesses are like at the crossroads right now. They haven't really made that decision. We're all using tech and we're all sort of testing it out, but and how we interpret big data and things like that, and who we choose to listen to as well, who feeds us this information. But he said we're still just at the starting point of all of this. So the role that data will play will be huge, of course.
Look, property management for the house profile is probably the area where that becomes the most valuable.
Yes.
So that's in utilising tech to manage the process for preventing things going wrong in a house rather than responding to them when they have gone wrong.
Yeah.
So there's some real efficiencies in that space that will happen over time, and that's just putting sensors in a whole range of elements of the property and getting a read on the utilisation of energy or what it may be inside the house to get a sense of whether that thing's about to break or whether it's not about to break, and it's got a lifespan of another 3 years. So, you know, I can see real power in that space. And then, you know, you've got the complete opposite side of that, which is the vendor side, which Mike started to allude to, which is a powerful side as well. And for big volume players, that stuff's really important. For more relationship-driven businesses like ours, it's less important because we're more hands-on. You know, I came on board and I was amazed at the level of work and things that the agents will do for clients without any return. And that's all about relationships, and it's about being part of that person's journey through their property cycle. And this business operates more like a professional services firm than a real estate agency. And you're working with us, not just thinking that we're going to sell your house, but we're your partner in buying and selling property over the course of your life.
Yep.
Is the best way to think about it. And it's not transaction in, out, this guy's going to sell, they're going to sell, move this one, sell quickly, move on to the next one. It doesn't really work that way.
Yeah.
And other places do it that way? Is that?
Yeah, the bigger the organisation, the more you need tech to get efficiencies and take advantages of your economies of scale.
Would you envisage a day where, what Matt was alluding to, if you bought a house, say, today, and we had a profile on that property, so we know that it's built 30 years ago, it was last painted 10 years ago, the plumbing might need to be renewed, all that sort of stuff. You get to a point where that homeowner and that property captured in the right ecosystem would only need a one-stop shop for all their property maintenance, and it could be all predictive around tech.
Yeah, I can absolutely see that world. I could see that you could use data to inform that person about whether they should renovate or whether they should sell and upgrade. What's been happening around their market, whether their suburb is growing faster than the suburbs around it, and now's the time where that's probably at its peak and the others are about to take off. So if you've got a plan to move somewhere for any reason, if you move there, you're actually going to benefit now more than buying there in 2 years' time. You know, data provides some pretty cool things around that. There's certain triggers around certain areas that we know about today, but we can't quite turn that into insight. So there's lots of data, but actually converting that data into insight and what's going to happen next is where we're on the precipice of, and that's where the real value is going to come into play.
So in our conversations before we got started, we talked a little bit about AI. Is that where we're going to get to a point, maybe somewhere down the track, where we can plug in an address and then a program will make suggestions based on all the things that you just talked about?
Yeah, I don't think it's too far. You know, I don't think it disrupts the industry completely though, right? So
I agree with what you're saying there.
Yeah, I've lived through a couple of disruptions. So I worked at Fairfax and saw the disruption of which internet did to print. And I worked at Census and watched Google destroy Yellow Pages, right? And sat in meetings where people have gone, Yellow Pages will be fine against Google because Google doesn't have all of the details of the owner of that small to medium business, and we do. And all it took was they had all the audience and they created a self-service version to enable those small to medium businesses to put their own details in. And because the audience was there, they did. And all of a sudden, Yellow Pages not around. Right? So I don't see that sort of stuff transforming the whole industry the way those industries have been transformed. You know, the purchase is just so big, and the higher you go up the real estate levels in terms of value of property, the more detailed and more people orientated and more risk goes into that transaction, which requires you to have a professional doing that transaction and assisting you.
Probably more private it gets as well.
More private, 100%.
People are very wary of privacy. But I see that happening as well. And if you had a digital file on a house, so every bill that had been paid, every rate that had been paid, every bit of maintenance, and maybe, you know, this gets to your area of work, Matt, where, you know, if there was a job done where pipes were replaced or something, you could rate the service and rate if there have been any issues, all that sort of stuff, and build a full 360-degree file on a property.
It's like a logbook for your house.
Exactly. And then that has application where, you know, for valuations, for insurance companies, all sorts of things, where we're probably just creating a more tech-efficient world, aren't we?
And you think about business, sort of relating it to houses. I mean, you can have a P&L, right? But what actually happens inside that business is not always reflected in the P&L. A unit down the road or house or whatever might be in this street might be worth $1 million to $5 million or beyond. But let's say it's worth $2 million. But behind that, like, is it?
Yeah. We see that all the time. I mean, we see it all the time.
Is it worth more or is it the other side of the coin?
Two similar homes sell for 20% difference or something, and you kind of go, how did that happen? But Maybe it was in the quality of the renovation, or maybe it was in the orientation of the property or whatever. So those subtleties can play out, in a very big way.
Or, of course, who's buying it at the time, I suppose,
Correct.
is a big factor as well, right? So as this info becomes, well, I suppose these ways of doing things are first developed and then they become more accessible, where does that leave you guys? Because we're seeing with some of the websites now, I mean, the prediction of property prices, as an example, some of those websites are getting pretty good at working out like exactly what will transpire in an auction or a sale or whatever. So where does that leave you guys getting to that point? I know this is not next week, this is down the road a little bit, but do you think about that? Do you think about that long game in those terms?
Totally. So there's certain things we acknowledge as a business, and this is what Justin was talking about before, where, and we use the term, it's a buzz term to say it's agent augmentation, and that's what tech is doing. And it's making agents smarter, but it's also empowering the consumer at the same time, because all this data's out there. There's a very good company in the US called Compass, which has had a very, very rapid growth story, and they were started by a guy who came out of Google, another guy who came out of Goldman Sachs, and they kind of had the model right. And this is getting back to the comments before about what is the right sort of mix of tech and human elements in a real estate business. They've got this great platform where they'll give you every stat to do with a particular marketplace of the property you're dealing in, and they'll break it down into specific amount of bedrooms, bathrooms, and how this specific category of property has performed in a market. So they're telling you that as a purchaser, and you can actually see on their app. It's free to download. You can go to any suburb in the US or that they're in, and you can see how much vendors have been discounting their asking prices over the last 6 weeks.
Okay.
Things like this. So we acknowledge that there's certain elements, such as valuation, that an agent won't be as relied upon in future for. However, we probably, as a result of that, know which areas of the business we need to double down on. And this is why we, as a business, have always taken that relationship path. And as Justin said, we tend to be an advisory style business or a professional services business, because just being there for the transaction, that is potentially disruptable down the track. So having someone that relies on us when it gets to the pointy end of buying or selling a property, that's where we want to be. But also extending beyond that, you want to be a part of their world. You want to be the person that they go to for any maintenance, the person that they go to for any sort of real estate requirement that they might have. If they want to invest, if they want to develop, if they want to be connected to the best architect in their market or something like that, you want to be the centre of that world for them.
So I also went to Inman last year in San Francisco, which is the centre of the universe for venture capital and tech.
It is.
And what was fascinating was that all of the VC money was going into the agency level, not in businesses to disrupt the agency. And Compass is a great example of that. So a huge amount of venture capital money to create Compass and Redfin and a whole range of others, but they are really at the agency level and not at the outside of that to try and disrupt it totally. And I think it's an acknowledgement that while tech will play a role, that the agency will still be at the heart of the transaction, because at the end of the day, it's a transaction between two people that are trying to buy something of extreme value. And the more commoditised a property is, there's big swathes of segments of the US that have one identical house after another.
Whole estates.
Estates. Yeah. And we have estates here too, but all of the houses are different in those estates. In the States, they are all identical, being built by exactly the same person, the exact same specifications. You don't need an agent to play a role to negotiate the transaction to a high degree with a high skill set in that world. But when you're living in, arguably the world's most livable city, and we're selling houses in the best suburbs in the world's most livable city for multi-million dollars, you need people on both sides of that scenario to make that transaction work and get people through that journey and help them. Part psychologist, part salesperson, part process manager, part legal. It's an incredible amount of work and shouldn't be taken lightly when you choose who you're going to see your house with.
Tech forces us as agents to be as sharp as it gets now because the consumer's super informed.
They can see.
And I was going to say, when I started in real estate, like 15 odd years ago, maybe 16, 17 years ago, there was almost this like attitude amongst certainly the older agents who had never encountered tech in their role as agents. They were almost like the guardians of information. Now all the information's out there and the cards are face up. So, and some of them haven't adapted to that now in the real estate world still. But there was a real, manipulation of information used to happen, and there were all those games that kind of almost, there was a charisma about those games and about the good old days, but it's a hyper-regulated world now, and like I said, the consumer's super informed. So you need to be not only across that information, but you need to be able to interpret the data, and that is your role, and to maximise the outcome for your client. So that is the role of the agent, to get that person what they want, and that's never going to change.
It's been fascinating for me to come into real estate from other industries, because a lot of other industries have engaged tech and digital marketing and other aspects a lot earlier than the real estate industry has. And I think that that's driven because we'd had 20 years of unparalleled growth of prices in the real estate industry. So there wasn't that driving force to get more efficient, to do things and look at them in a different way, because it was all going so well for so long. Out of the automotive industry, which is where I've come, the margins had been slashed. It was so slim for such a long time, and there was a number of players eating into those margins in an aggressive way, that all of the players needed to find more efficient ways to do things, otherwise they weren't going to survive. And I think that that's why there's such an arms race in real estate now, because it was all hitting all at the same time.
Well, and why the US is 3 or 4 years ahead.
Correct.
Because they had their
GFC, and we kind of got through fairly unscathed.
We just protected the status quo, and it's now being revolutionised. There's nothing like a good downturn in a market to kind of reset expectations around all that.
I wanted to get that in just a second, but it's probably a good question to ask yourself, right? No matter what business you're in, if my profit margins were cut to 10% of what they are right now, how would I react? How could I become more efficient? What could I do differently? How could I still make that work? Which is, that's what's happened in the automotive industry, right? So
100%.
We had a very long period of the gold rush has been on, right? We've levelled to whatever way that you want to sort of read the figures, if you like. So what has that meant for your business in the last 12 to 18 months? Because it's tougher now, right?
Yeah, it is. And the downturn wasn't exactly... A lot of people were saying Australian house prices were overvalued by a lot of measures, but a lot of those people were sitting behind desks of ratings companies overseas and stuff. Like it was, and I know the same people kept saying Australia's headed for a crash for 10 years, and they kept saying it, and one day they'll be right, kind of thing. So, but it corrected, and it was perhaps through a bit of regulation. I mean, we've had the banking inquiry, which obviously upset a lot of the lending practices and has severely restricted credit over the last couple of years. I mean, we all know about the reasons why Australia's sort of had this downturn over the last sort of 12, 18 months. But I think one thing we did as a business, in a weird way, we kind of enjoy these markets, and I'll explain that a little bit. Given that we've been talking about how our sort of philosophy centres around being a relationship-driven business versus a more transactional business, what tends to happen in downturns is people go to safe havens. They don't go to the risky sort of option. In residential real estate, there's plenty of agents that talk a good game, but maybe are not fundamentally fantastic agents. There's a lot of spin, and there's a lot of intangibles about selling a property, whereas if you are super professional, if you're well connected, if you can access people with money in a downturn that can come out and buy properties that perhaps people are highly motivated to sell, you will be the agent selected kind of thing. So that comes back to the heritage of this business, which is, we have great connection to I guess the wealthy end of the market, but also we have the expertise to transact in a tough market. Whereas, and turnover in Melbourne, broadly speaking, has dropped away, about 40% or something like that in the last, a bit over the last 12 months. I mean, it's 40% less transactions out there. So if you have built your business for good times, which is what a lot of real estate companies did in Melbourne and Sydney and Brisbane over the last 20 years.
A lot of new ones popping up too in that time.
So, like you said, everyone's sort of been kicking with the breeze for the last 20 years, and not, like I said, people sort of didn't see this coming terribly quickly. So we've seen a lot of people leave the industry. It has been too tough. Big time. I mean, we haven't had that many. There's always naturally a few people who are perhaps fresh to the industry who just say, this is just too tough. I can't make a buck. And that's just a natural sort of churn that happens. And then there's big companies that probably put on a lot of people, train them up quickly just to do transactions, not to look after the long term for people. And they get freed up pretty quickly. So this happens pretty dramatically. And then obviously you do spend a lot in businesses as well. And that can get away in good times as well. So we've just seen a lot of businesses in Melbourne lean up over the last 12, 18 months, which has been interesting to watch. But I think the style of business that we are, it's protected us pretty well over the last 12, 18 months. Our market share in a lot of our core markets has actually gone up in the last 12 months against our competitors. A bit of that sort of strength of brand, it does come through relationships. You know, you'll always have that consistent business that comes through the door. And then the other part of it is your other revenue streams as a real estate company. So, you know, property management projects we run. There's a concierge business that we have as well, that all of these elements, you know, can protect you from the storm a little bit as well.
I can only assume that when you're operating at the higher end of the market in terms of value, there's probably a few shrewd operators out there that wait for these times before they start acquiring things, right?
It's the Warren Buffett blood on the streets rule.
That's true.
Yeah.
Yes. You're smiling. It's not a no.
But the reason probably we've had such low turnover is because interest rates are so low and going lower, and global interest rates are as well, that there hasn't been the duress come into the market. And this is where, you know, we haven't had many mortgagee sales like we did at the last sort of major correction that the Melbourne market went through. It was blood on the streets, and people were losing their houses and losing their jobs, and, you know, really tough times. But people manage it differently now. They insulate themselves. You know, wealth management's a huge thing, and part of that's, you know, people don't lose their houses anymore so much, it seems.
Which probably comes with a market that gets regulated, as you said, a lot more than what it used to be. It protects the consumers, right? That's why it's regulated.
Yeah.
True.
Yeah, I think, you know, the market's had two impacts from where I'm sitting. The first one is, for a business like ours, well, we play the long game with our clients, we play the long game with our business as well. So what was really pleasing to see is that we continue to invest in marketing our brand, we continue to invest in training our agents all the way through that period. We didn't stop really doing anything.
Yep.
We were a bit more careful, and we were a bit more thoughtful, is probably the extent of it. But
we opened up two offices.
We opened two offices
and
and expanded our rent rolls and invested in marketing people, not just myself, but another senior marketing manager that came out of Domain Chandon luxury brand. So there's significant investments in resources and human capital. And then on the other side, you've got the landlord and vendor, or the vendor on the buyer side. I think that people have had a situation with their houses. They put it on the market. They'd invest big in the campaign, and it was how many people came, not whether people would come, right? And what I found happened was that the really good properties still got lots of people coming to them. But if there was some elements of your property that weren't perfect, that weren't quite at the top of its game compared to what it was competing against, you got a disproportionately downgraded performance than the people at the top. Because in a really good market, and a market that's growing, people look at that and go, oh, I missed out on that one because it was absolutely fantastic and there was so many people interested in it. I have to make some compromises and I have to drop down to the next one, because if I don't buy it now, I won't be able to afford it in 6 months. Whereas, so everyone was going to the perfect house. If I miss out on the perfect house, well, I'll wait and see on those other ones, because it's, at worst, it might be the same, and at best, it might be cheaper.
Yep.
So
the urgency goes out of the whole.
Absolutely. So much like a football team needs to understand where they sit in the premiership window,
Yes.
you need to understand where your property sits in your competitive set. So you need to think really carefully about those sorts of things. And it just becomes a much higher risk game, a much more important decision-making process than to just give it to an agent who you know, who you like. That, you know, you have to treat that as a serious business decision.
Well, to speak to what you said, that's when the data can come in, right? Because
100%.
in this period of time, there might be certain properties that do attract a premium, even though the market's down. Am I understanding this correctly?
Absolutely.
Do you have an example of, like, not an address and a person, obviously,
Yeah.
but the type of property where that's happened or played out in?
Yeah, we've seen advertising campaigns that have sold for hundreds of thousands of dollars over what we thought they would go for. We've built really good campaigns that sold that property multi-channel, where they've committed, they knew they had a good property and they've committed to advertising that property on a multi-channel campaign and got a great outcome. I had a personal experience where one of my family members came into an inheritance. I went and looked at a property in a particular suburb, and it was a great renovation in a really popular suburb, and there were 120 people at the open for inspection.
Oh, wow.
It was off the charts, and this was at the peak
Yeah.
of what people were calling the downturn. And everybody could see that that was a great property. Everybody could see that that was going to be a great suburb to live in, and it was only going to have an upward trajectory.
Yes.
So yeah, I could see it from a work perspective, and I could see it from a personal perspective as well. And you know, there was another couple of houses around that neighbourhood, not as good, not in as good a spot, not having the right orientation, whatever it may be, and they had a quarter of the people at them, for example.
It's like social media and algorithms and all the rest of it, right?
Yeah.
You can sort of game the system for a little while, but at the end of the day, the cream rises to the top,
Yeah.
right? If you hang in there.
It's the
long
fundamentals
enough.
are strong, it'll be good.
What impact, if any, has the Airbnb way of doing things impacted the real estate game in general?
I think regardless of whether it's Airbnb, Uber, Domino's, the biggest change is that people's expectation of service and how technology can improve their service experience goes across industries. So you cannot compare yourself against your competitors within your industry. You have to compare yourself against the best exponents of service, regardless of the industry.
Yes, that's a very important statement you just made, yes.
And it doesn't matter what the price point is. The experience you get in ordering a Domino's pizza is exceptional. And you should be expecting that same level of service at a high-priced purchased item. Sometimes it comes in different ways. In some instances, we'll use less tech because it's more important to actually spend time with the person to achieve that outcome rather than just delivering it to them but not explaining it.
Yeah.
So it's getting that balance right.
In a fundamental way, if you order a pizza and then try and get a hold of your real estate agent, even if the real estate agent is contacted the same way as what they used to be, because that pizza experience is a lot better than what it previously is, you by default look bad.
Yes.
So you actually need to get better just to keep up. And that's not a real estate thing, that's across the board 100%. But we do think that way, right? Like Amazon, one click, why can't property be that way? Like even if it's not quite possible yet, we think that way in our minds because we're getting trained into it, right?
Constantly disappointed in some way, shape or form by a lot of experiences.
Yes. Yeah.
And real estate is one.
Yep.
Real estate, and harking back to this Inman conference that we went to, I remember they had a panel where they got 3 of the most successful, sort of currently successful real estate businesses, the CEOs of all of them up there, and they said, what are your standards around response time to an inquiry? And the first guy was quite happy with himself, and he said, we've got a standard, and we've been working on this for ages, 30 minutes. We'll get back to you in 30 minutes.
So this is someone who goes online and says, I'm interested in buying property A.
They'll get a phone call or an email back within 30 minutes. And realestate.com, it wasn't long ago that they were telling us in Australia standards were around 24 hours, the average. 24 hours to get back to you. I think if that happened now, I'm sort of going back a couple of years from that, quoting that stat, but if you did that now, I reckon a buyer almost says to you, I don't even remember what property I was inquiring about. Like it's out of their mind now. It's just the way our brains have evolved sort of thing.
And there are third-party businesses that will actually handle your inquiries for you, and they will guarantee you a response within 5 minutes.
was going to go on about this guy in the US with his 30-minute response time, and the second guy on the panel was asked about his response time, and he said, I don't mean to trump you here, but he said, ours is 5 minutes.
Yeah. And
everyone kind of gasped and went, geez, 5 minutes, that's pretty impressive. And then the third guy goes, I'm glad you've done it in this sequence because our standard is 30 seconds. We have a call, he said literally we have effectively what's a call centre in their office. They've got all the data on every property and they will just hit a button. I think it'll probably auto-dial for them. Straight off this inquiry within 30 seconds, you'll hear from someone. So if that's the standard over there, it's not long before Australia will hit that standard. And we're very, very conscious that will be the expectation.
So how do you then make sure your brand comes through in that experience? Because that becomes the next challenge, right? Because, I could start up Matt's Real Estate tomorrow and put the same system in as you. Yep. Who's better? So how do you make sure that you outperform me or outmarket me?
Yeah. Like I said, tech shouldn't replace the key functions of an agent, but tech can make life much more efficient. So response times to inquiry are a really simple one, but when it comes to the quality of information that comes to you, that gets back to then a training, a people thing, and that stems from your values and your standards as a company. So Matt, as long as you have standards that match up to the best people in the business, then there's no reason why you can't start tomorrow. And that's how competitive the world is these days.
So the tech component is we can have the same phone system in place that get back to you in the same time, but then maybe when we go out to show a client or prospective buyer or whoever to the property, that's where suddenly it's like, oh, okay, Matt's maybe not quite up to this, whereas Michael is clearly ahead.
I'll give you a simple example. I took a client around 4 properties. They were out from overseas, these people, and they wanted to buy a home in Melbourne. We took them to 4 properties and they said to me, we had the listing agent, so the person who's responsible for that property but also the most knowledgeable about that property at each of the inspections to effectively open the door and welcome them to the property. Yep. And he said, wow, do you do this for every property? And I said, yeah, absolutely. That's our standard as a company. And then he said, right. He goes, I've been around with 3 other companies. He goes, the agent couldn't answer the questions. There was no one there to open the door. He was fumbling around with the keys and all this sort of stuff. So
the keys don't work. We've all been there before, haven't we?
Or they don't have them.
Yeah.
So I just think you've got to be very vigilant over what you stand for, what your standards are, and it's great for us to beat our chest about that, but what is really at our core is making sure that the customer has had a good experience. And they ended up buying through us because we made the process so easy for them. And when they were walking in the door, they weren't walking into a place that didn't have any lights on, the heating wasn't on in the middle of winter, which we are right now, and things like this. They had, we understood that those things actually matter. And this hasn't been something we've decided on yesterday either. This is in the DNA of the company for 30 years.
Going ahead, you've got someone waiting at the property, so you go ahead, you get the lights right, you get the temperature right, all those sort of things, because they all go into, I suppose, showcasing that home in the most attractive way, right?
Yeah, it's a sensory, emotive experience buying a home, so we sort of understand those elements.
If you're quick back to somebody with a response, but that response is of no value to them, you've actually just wasted more of their time.
Oh, that's another good point, yeah.
Rather than enhance their experience, you've actually kind of made it worse because they've had to take time to consume that response as well. So you've then utilised more of their time. So I think you've got to be really careful to not put tech in and then not actually have the experience that you hope for. I had one recently where I made an inquiry. I was looking at a property and I made an inquiry about one via their website, and when there was an online chat component that came on, and what I wanted to do was that there was no open for inspections outlined on the property. I wanted to have a look at it then. I was right out the front of the house. If you've got online chat, I can talk to someone, so I started talking to them, and they're like, and I was sitting in my car and I'm like, can I have a look? Is this property still for sale? Yes, it's still for sale. Can you tell me when the next open for inspection is? Yes, you can go to our website and you can have a look for the times. And I responded back, well, actually, I've had a look and there's nothing outlined. Oh, well, you can send an email to this person and they will come back to you at some point in the future to tell you when you can have a look or when the next open for inspection is going to be. It's like, it actually was a worse experience than if I had have just been able to ring somebody and speak to them over the phone and had a conversation And they probably would have been more likely for that to come out and actually show me. But they put all these steps in play that was designed to make it easy, actually made it worse.
That's sort of why the purple bricks thing didn't work as well, because you got that sort of experience with them, and it just missed the mark, didn't it?
So I want to be mindful of your time and not keep you here all afternoon. Is there anything else you wanted to add to this space about how you go about things, how you, from a brand perspective or anything like that, before we start to wrap up?
We're very conscious of what our brand stands for, and we just make sure that everyone is ingrained with those values and standards from day one. So, and that's not unlike any business these days. Everything's competitive, and whether it's real estate or anything else, we're just conscious of that, and that then feeds through to Justin's role as a marketer or our receptionist role, you know, how they meet and greet someone. It's those sorts of standards, how we conduct ourselves on social media, all this sort of stuff flows from those values. So that hasn't been sat down and formatted over the last week or something. That's been in the company's DNA for decades now.
Yeah, it's, you know, if I communicate it with my team and we communicate it to the businesses, it's a consistency of action, effort and purpose. And if you consistently deliver all of those things, then you will be on brand. And it's when you let one of those elements go that at some point that experience will not be on brand. And then for that person, they're looking at it and go, well, there's a disconnect between the brand that I'm presented and the brand experience that I actually received. And in a service business like ours, where it's very people-driven, it's a constant challenge. And people have good days and bad days. It's not like an iPhone where you make the product and it lives up to that every day. So it is a challenge, but it is just that training, ingraining that brand in all aspects of the business and everything we do, as Mike was saying, is critical.
One question that I do ask everyone, so I'll ask both of you, if you'd have one law changed, what would it be? Changed or implemented, excuse me.
So you had our managing director on your show previously, Matt, and he mentioned compliance as his big thing, and I would wholeheartedly echo that. I think it's necessary, but the amount of paperwork that is involved in every transaction these days, but just probably I'd call it almost like kind of irrelevant scrutiny of what we do has gone too far now with a lot of regulators. And we've seen in the Melbourne market in particular, there's been companies taken down for breaches of compliance, and I mean taken down like hundreds of thousands of dollars of fines, millions of dollars of fines in some instances. And I know people in those businesses who've had to sell their houses and things like it's impacted them far deeper than a slap on the wrist. And sure, you've got to regulate hard when you put something in place, but they've been taken down for things that are avoidable. An example is underquoting in our industry. There's a huge amount of compliance around this, but there's still a lot of grey areas. Vendors aren't regulated as to what they have to accept for their home, for example. So what I mean by that is if we've got a property and we promote it in a 10% range of 1 million to 1.1 million, and a vendor says, I'm not accepting anything under 1.2, well, there's regulation around how you then have to manage that process.
So you then have to go to the market and say it's round figures 1.1 to 1.2 then?
No, you have to say 1.2. You can't make a representation of the market anymore about what your hand-on-heart opinion of its value is. You have to only represent what the owner will accept, and that's just fraught with danger.
So if I come to you with that $1 million property and I say, but I won't accept anything under 1.5, you have to go out and market and advertise at that 1.5.
Yeah, and then it breaks the law if I say to you, okay, Matt, if that's what you want, but I need to go out to the market and say it's worth 1 million because then we won't get any interest.
Yeah.
I've just broken the law. Now, I'm not saying that that's wrong. I just think that there's too much regulation around and paperwork and compliance around certain aspects of our business now. But the whole quoting thing, probably it's been formulated, those laws, by people who don't truly understand the nature of residential property markets.
Yeah, it's hard, isn't it? Because it falls in that category where you see it in corporate and big business a lot, where there are people that don't do things in the spirit of what they should be done.
Well,
and then
banking and finance industry is the best example.
Absolutely. And then it can be over-regulated and then the wrong people get pulled up.
Correct.
So it's tough, isn't it?
It is. So the industry does need regulation, but there needs to be an overlay of understanding that markets change, and there's been a lot of properties sell for well under what they're worth and things like this, and well under where they're quoted in the last 12 months. But because of compliance and regulation, it's hard to change quickly when the market changes quickly.
Because you're building on data from the past and you're trying to price for the future. So
Yes.
this is tough. The bank valuations will be under or over depending on which direction the market's going based on what direction the market was in the past. So it gets really tricky. From my perspective, I think that what would be fantastic is more degrees of certification for real estate agents.
I agree with that one as well.
Oh, like a training, like more like a doctor sort of.
Yeah, so more certification to be able to differentiate the skill levels of agents based on how long they've been in the industry, what training and courses and certification and mentoring and all of those things to make it easier for a vendor and a buyer to be able to understand who they're dealing with. Much like builders, master builders, CPAs versus chartered accountants, it gives you a sense of where you're dealing with and enables you to separate a really experienced, qualified, professional real estate agent from somebody that has been in the industry for not very long.
Who's got a slick pitch.
Correct, because it is one of those skill sets that is built over time and through experience, much like being a project manager. A project manager that's been doing it for 2 years is nowhere near as good as one that's been doing it for 12, because project management is all about understanding where things go wrong and what could happen, and real estate is very similar to that. So some recognition of length of experience and training and all of those sorts of things, rather than just the formal, they understand how to abide by the law and transact a sale.
There's a big wave of younger people who've come into the business, and I'll almost call them like the Gary V generation, because they get fired up and they think that, you know, there's a whole range of training. There's a guy called Tom Panos, who's a brilliant trainer in our industry, but he's very energy based, and so he's brilliant technically as well, but it's very much around energy. And young people hear this and they interpret it and they think that they can come in and arrive here day one with a great amount of energy. And it's like, in this market that we're in, it's like, what else have you got? Because that's like 1% of it at the moment.
Yeah.
What's your knowledge around building marketing strategies, about negotiation, about trends and being able to interpret data like we've been talking about? I mean, there's so much more to it that I agree, Justin, it does need some sort of structure around differentiating agents.
It will give
and higher barriers of entry to the industry.
Yeah, to be honest. But it will give the vendors and the public some understanding of what they're buying, and it will give the practitioners in the industry ability to be able to differentiate their fees according to the level of professionalism that they're going to deliver. Because at the moment, the hardest thing for somebody in the general public is to look at two agents and understand why I'm paying that much for that person and that much for that person. And until they've actually gone through that experience, and sometimes they'll come out and it'll be okay and sometimes they won't, it's not until you've been through that experience where you thought you've got a good deal and you've come out the other end and you actually haven't, that you realise that you need to pay for what you get.
Yeah, and especially with the social area that we live in, trying to bring that understated prestige, I suppose, through your brand is a lot more challenging than just
very true.
Volume and hype, and just keep it sort of rolling, right? So I guess that's another big challenge that everyone that works under this roof is going to have to work through, particularly as it becomes much more and more important, I would have thought. So,
very true.
But again, I want to be respectful of both of your time. So to find you both, if somebody wants to track you down, kayburton.com.au is your website, obviously, which you can then get to. What's the best way to get in contact? Is there any preferred LinkedIn or social place?
I'm on LinkedIn. We've got, every agent has an impressive social media account these days, so any of those channels. But I think Justin's been working hard on our website, so it's worth a look if anyone is interested in our business. As you say, kayburton.com.au.
Yep, and LinkedIn for me is the best way to reach me. I like to share all my real estate news and insights with my audience on there, so I think it's the best way to reach me.
Perfect, and I'll make links to both of those in the notes of this. So thank you very much for carving out a little bit of your day to do this. Appreciate chatting to you both as always, and seeing where this industry continues to move to in the next few years. It's going to be exciting, if nothing else, right, to see where we end up in 5 or 10 years from now. So
absolutely.
Thanks to you both.
Thanks, Matt.
Thanks, Matt.
Hey everybody, it's Matt again. Thanks for listening. Just a couple of things before you guys clock off. You can get all Trench Talk episodes at xrm.com.au/podcast. You can also sign up for other goodies at the same site. Just plonk your email in there and you are covered. That's X for X-ray, R for Romeo, M for Mike.com.au/podcast. If you really like what I'm bringing you, please head to iTunes, subscribe to this show and leave a review right there. And lastly, if you want to contact me directly, type the @ symbol followed by Mr. Matt Reynolds into your search bar and you'll find all the social links. Goodbye.